Hey, hi everyone. My name is Yash. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've been working in policy for about 5, 6 years now. Right, started by working in the Parliament as a LAM fellow, then worked in consulting for a year. Then I was with Twitter, India and South Asia for a couple of years in a public policy role, and since then, I've been running my own consulting firm. And of course, in the last 4 years, we have also built Public Policy India, right, PPI, this community and an attempt at quite frankly building out a platform, a knowledge platform in the public policy space and the broader policy and social impact space, right? When we can tell people why policy matters, how they can engage with the same, right? And just make it easier for them to build meaningful careers in this space overall, right? This is going to be a very short, direct, and very succinct sort of a video. Right? The idea is for me to, I have the privilege of talking to multiple new people every single day, right? And it's generally a great privilege, get to learn from their experiences and their perspectives and queries, right? And here what I'll try and do is try and distill all my learnings, right, almost like a collective sort of a wisdom from our community as well, right, and from practitioners that I've seen over almost 8 years, since even while I was in college I was just interning and working left and center. And yeah, so just answer 5 of the most common questions that I get almost on the daily about public policy and careers in this space, right? In fact, I had started with a list of 10 questions. I'll keep referring to my notes here, at least a list of questions that I keep getting, right? And I think at this video we'll try and start off with the 5 most common questions, right? Share some perspectives on the same, and of course, if if it is of value to you, depending on your comments, engagement, whatever, right? We'll try and do more of this, as a part of a series, right? But again, thank you so much for joining. And the 5 questions that we want to cover and take up in this video itself, right, is firstly, how do you even define public policy, right? Then what are the pillars of policy making? How does that entire thing work, right? Where is it that people are building careers in this space, right? With what skills? What kind of organizations are hiring, right? How can one go about building careers in this broader space, right? There's a credentials framework. How's the world of public policy structure in India from a careers perspective right now in India, right? And how can one transition to the policy space overall, right? So let's just start with and by the way, before we begin, right, there are many practitioners, experts, right, who might have slightly different perspectives on the same broader principles, right? The idea is not for me or for anyone to tell you this is the way or this is the sort of a structuring, right? The idea is to just share sort of what I've learned over almost 8 years of doing this, right, and what I have seen work for thousands of people, right, quite literally live, right, when talking to them and then following up after a few months and seeing that yes, this actually works out for thousands of people over all these years, right? If you disagree, that's great. Feel free to in fact share in comments because the community will be wiser for it, right? So yeah, let's just get started. So firstly, and I always try and approach this from a broader philosophical perspective, which is what is the state, what is the government, right? If you think about it, why does someone fear breaking the traffic rule, like skipping a red light or something, right? Why does someone fear not paying taxes, right? Or why would someone ordinarily not go and conduct a heist or a burglary at someone else's apartment or whatever, right? But because people fear repercussions, right? People fear they might be jailed or taken to court and put into prison or whatever, right? The point being, they fear there will be some form of violence inflicted upon them, right? The state, right, and I think it was Max Weber, right, in his sort of a theoretical inception that it's an entity which has monopoly over violence, right? It's an entity which, in a sense, the bargain, the contract that you have, right, is that, hey, we as citizens, we surrender our rights to violence, right? Only the state has monopoly over violence, which when I say the state, I don't mean state like governments, right? Like this state as that political and broader societal entity, right? And instruments of the state, institutions of the state have monopoly over violence, be it the army, police, or whatever, right? And in exchange for that, right, the state shall enforce law and order in a sense, right? And so that we as citizens and ordinary citizens don't engage in violence of any form, right, on one another, right? And the state has that monopoly over violence and it can enforce law and order, and we can go about our lives and building civilization in that sense, right? Going about conducting trade and whatever, just building careers and just living a life and advancing society in that sense, right? And sorry, did this pause? Yeah, okay, perfect. So that's the broader idea over there, right? So when, as a part of that contractual bargain, right, and sometimes we call it the social contract as well, right? I mean, social contract is basically the constitution of a country in an oversimplified sense, right? That the state shall provide for law and order and justice and just all the conditions necessary for citizens to be able to lead a fulfilling lives of their own, right? And that's where public policy comes in. Like, how I would define is the art and science of a public agency solving for a public problem using public money via public solutions, right? So, if the road in front of your house is broken, for example, again, the art and science of a public agency solving for a public problem using public money via public solutions is public policy, broadly speaking, right? So say if the road in front of your house is broken, right? That's a public problem because the society at large faces it, right? Issues arising from that, right? Economic loss of time, accidents, whatever, right? If there's there's a theft in your apartment or something, that's a private issue. Of course, that's something you solve with the help of police agencies, but you get the point, right? And so the public problem is that solved by a public agency, right? So public agency as in the government at any level, right? State, city, national. Technically, what we call the sole signing authority is there's the sole preserve of the government, right? So solved by a public agency using public money, taxpayers' money, right? Basically, and by a public solution. So bit of a hit and a miss, but basically, if the government rebuilds the road, it can't be like, hey, only these 5 people get to use it because they paid the most taxes. No, the society large benefits from it as well, right? So yeah, the art and science of a public agency solving for a public problem using public money via public solutions, right? Public policy, right? And a policy job might be any job that allows you to participate in this broader sort of a process of value chain, right? Now, how does policy making work, right? So, okay, here there are many different interpretations, and quite frankly, all of them are right, okay, in terms of different pillars, terminologies, and all of it. I'm just about to share what I have seen. In my understanding, is very simple and has helped many people just get a broader sense of the nuance of this, right? So there's 5 pillars, right? EDME, the 5 pillars of policy making, and is the same around the world, of course. We captured by an acronym called EDME: ideation, design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, right? The 5 pillars: ideation, design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. Let's stick to the same example. So in our case, the public problem is broken roads, and the public agency, let's just assume you live in Bombay, right? So the public agency is Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation, right? BMC, right? So the first pillar, ideation, right? So how does the public agency, which is BMC, get an idea about a public problem, which is a broken road, right? So hundreds of ways, right? Actually, the media can report on it, right? We as citizens can write to the corporators, right? A municipal commissioner, elected representatives, local MP, MLA, they can raise it up, right? MLCs, of course, right? For a lot of public problems, sometimes think tanks come out with reports that, hey, this sort of a challenge exists that we should pay attention to, and so on and so forth, right? Sometimes other, institutions of other countries highlight a public problem that we might also have to pay focus to. I think recently there's been an issue around some, carcinogenic additives in some spices, popular spices brands from India, whatever. This is an example, right? So that has woken up, the food safety regulator in India to sort of investigate. So yeah, basically hundreds of ways, right? In which a public agency gets an idea, a public institution gets an idea about a public problem, right? So that's ideation. The next one is design, right? So the government would be like, hey, there's a broken road and it's a public problem because there's economic loss, there's loss of lives, right? There's, accidents, whatever, right? So we have to solve for it, right? So you understand that there's a market failure, basically, what we call in economic terms, that a private agency will not rebuild the road because, everyone else can benefit from it. So it's something that the government has to do. Like it's like providing for defense or safety of a country, right? It's the job of a government, right? It's a public good in that sense. And so, government, okay, I'm speaking about the design pillar, right? Ideation we have just discussed. Now the design pillar of policy making out of the 5 pillar process, right? So it's like, okay, hey, there's a broken road, we have to solve for it. It's a public problem. We can, either get people on our own payrolls to do this, or we can get the private sector to do this. It'll be faster, probably cheaper. Government hiring is kind of complex, so on and so forth, right? So it'll be like, fine, there's a broken road, it's a public problem, we'll solve for it, we'll get the private sector to rebuild the road, and we'll pay them, right? So that's design. I'm oversimplifying, okay, just clearly stating it out, right? But the idea is to get across the broader essence of these processes, right? Then that brings us to the next pillar, which is implementation, right? So the government, there's nothing known as government money, right? It's all taxpayers' money, right? And so the idea is to do it at the cheapest rate possible. And so the government would be like, let's do one thing. What the BMC might be thinking, let's bring out a tender, right? Different contractors can bid for this tender, and whoever bids the lowest wins the contract, right? The so-called L1 system in government, right? So yeah, they bring out a tender, different contractors bid for it, a particular contractor wins, whoever bids the lowest, and they rebuild the road and they get paid by the government. If you think about it, in the third pillar itself of policy making, the public agency has solved the public problem using public money. The road is rebuilt, right? Now any such contract will come with a maintenance clause that for the next 6 months, 1 year, 5 year, whatever, you have to maintain the road, right? The winning contractor basically, right? So that brings us to the next pillar of policy making, which is monitoring, right? So evaluating, basically getting a sense of whether the policy intervention is working, how well it is working, so on and so forth, so that the public problem does not recur, essentially, right? So in this case, it would be that whether the contractor is keeping their end of the bargain. And if they are not, you simply sue them. There's a reason why the government is one of the biggest, if not the biggest litigator in India, right? Sues the most, gets sued the most, whatever, right? And so that, and at the end of that time period, whatever that might be, right? The time period during which the winning contractor is stipulated to maintain the road, we come to the final pillar of policy making, which is evaluating what worked and what did not, basically, right? The next time should we blacklist this contractor. Next time should we rebuild the road ourselves if it's a very frequent occurrence. Next time should we build concrete roads instead of asphalt. In large parts of Bombay, I think a lot of roads are made out of asphalt or concrete. Asphalt, I think, right? Out of concrete, right? Costs a little more upfront but lasts longer. Essentially evaluating what worked and what did not, right? In the policy intervention that we did this time around, so that the next time that this public agency is faced with a similar public problem, they can respond better, right? So I hope that that closes the cycle, that paints a picture for you, right? There are many other things. For example, some policy changes need the creation of new institutions, right? For example, implementing the GST needed the creation of a GST council, right? For example, some policy changes also need legislative approval. So there are different steps, right? But broadly speaking, as an essence, these are like the broader 5 pillars, and everything else you can loosely categorize to fall within one of these buckets, right? But I hope that gives you an idea about the policy making process in that sense, right? Now, why this becomes important is because if you think about it, in each of these pillars of policy making, the 5 pillars, it's a 5 pillar process, right? In the way that I've categorized it, right? There are different skills needed and different kind of organizations that do the work. Okay, for example, if you tell me that, hey, I want to work in policy research, then there's a high chance that you're telling me that you're implying that you want to work in the policy design pillar out of the 5 pillar process, because that is the pillar during which the government reaches out to think tanks, experts, universities, academia for best practices, right? So that they can be incorporated during the design phase itself of the broader policy sort of objective and goal that we have, right? It does not mean that you won't need research skills in any other pillar. It just means that it's heavily concentrated in this one pillar for sure, right? Similarly, if you tell me that, hey, I want to work in social impact, right, development sector, non-profits, then essentially what it's saying is that you wish to work in the implementation pillar of policy making, right? Because that's what NGOs do, bring policy initiatives closer to the people at the grassroots, right? Take Teach for Indian Education, for example. This is one example, right? The skills needed to work in each of these pillars are also different. The skills needed to work in, say, policy ideation are very different from evaluation, right? Ideation is a lot of research, surveying. Evaluation is mostly, a lot of econometrics, statistics, numbers, data, and so on and so forth, right? The kind of organization that work in each of these pillars are also different, right? Again, there are overlaps, but broadly speaking, the kind of organization that work in, say, policy design are very different from implementation, right? Design is think tanks, universities, academia. Policy implementation is mostly CSOs, NPOs, non-profits, NGOs, so on and so forth, right? Yes, and then there are also some consulting firms which work across all 5 pillars. But broadly speaking, I hope this paints a picture for you. The public policy is, but even within policy, this how things are organized, as we can see it, right? The next bit to get a sense of would be, how is the world of public policy structured in India from a careers perspective, right? There's 3 things the way that I see it. There's spaces, there's functions, and then there's verticals. Okay, so spaces, where all can you work in public policy? So you can work in the research space, as we have discussed. Again, 3 sort of legs or pillars, to define how is the world of public policy structured in India right now from a careers perspective, right? Spaces, functions, and verticals. Spaces, where all can you work in public policy? So under spaces, there's what we have just discussed, the research space, right? That think tanks, university, academia. There's the public sector space, basically working with the government, right? For the government. So In the public sector space, you can work at the government of India level. So that's, Niti Aayog, Invest India, a lot of ministries hire young professionals, right? In the public sector space, you can also work at the state government level, right? So states don't have ministries, they have departments, right? A lot of state departments hire on contractual roles. So a lot of state chief ministers now have fellowships, right? Even at the district level, there are now some fellowship programs, right? So that's broadly in the public sector space. You can work in the legislative space, right? So in the legislative space, again, you can work at the government of India level. So the parliament has a LAMP fellowship, Mukherjee fellowship. The Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha secretariat keeps hiring time and again, right? In the legislative space, you can also work at the state government level. Delhi Assembly has DRC, Delhi Assembly Research Center, the DARC fellowship. I think they've discontinued for now, if I'm not wrong. When people could work in the Delhi Assembly to design policies, right? I think I just saw 2 days back something similar was launched in West Bengal. But anyways, so that's at the state government level in the legislative space, right? You can work in the private sector space, right? So like how I worked at Twitter for a couple of years in a public policy role. Most large companies have public policy teams. In fact, even startups do these days, right? Businesses have woken up to the reality that having a policy function, especially beyond a certain scale, is a must-have, not a good to have, right? The regulatory environment is increasing complex, and it just helps to have this sort of a presence. You can work in the policy consulting space, right? So even traditionally your big fours as well, right? And like EY, PwC, and Deloitte, and so on and so forth, they have fairly meaningful policy practices, right? Different names: social sector practice, government affairs practice, public affairs practice, government relations practice, whatever. But broadly policy work, right? At least in this domain, right? So, and by the way, there are a lot of now niche consulting firms which work, like boutique consulting firms which work in this niche itself. There's Samagra, there's GDI partners, right? Which work just in, on policy mandates, right? So that's the policy consulting space. You can work in the political consulting space, right? Even a place like IPAC mostly hires people with a policy background because technically politicians are just elected lawmakers. I mean, if you think about it, right? So a lot of synergies there. You can work in the policy advocacy space, right? So what we traditionally call lobbying in the West, right? Very fast growing space in India again, right? Given especially the number of new companies, manufacturing companies entering India, all sorts of MNCs, especially at the state government level, right? So there's that. You can work in the social impact space, right? So at this point, I think lakhs of organizations, right? Very small, micro, large, whatever, working across different sectors, right? Gender, healthcare, education, environment at the grassroots, right? You can work in the multilateral space, right? So, there's your Asian Development Bank, there's World Bank, even like your UNESCO, UNICEF, UN, a lot of these organizations with an India policy presence, right? I can go on and on. So there's hundreds of spaces that you can work in public policy, in the broader public policy and dev sector space, social impact space, right? And in each space, there are a lot of organizations working, right? Now, the next bit for us to understand would be verticals, right? So verticals essentially, which sector does your work focus on, right? This is vertical that you're working in. So they can be, for example, the sector that your work focuses on can be gender, healthcare, education, environment, climate change, urban management, right? Everything under the sun is a concern of public policy, right? You might have seen a lot of people who prepare for UPSC, they do mention this, right? That the syllabus is basically everything under the sun, right? From nuclear energy sort of administration to, improving learning outcomes in India, right? So it's basically everything is of interest to governance and governments, right? And so yeah, in terms of sectors and verticals, it could be equally diverse for you, right? It is usually advised to try out different verticals early on in your career before you specialize in something, right? But even if you pick a specialization very early on, big deal, I guess, that's fine, right? And the final bit would be functions. So functions, in what role can you work in public policy? So again, spaces where are you working, vertical is in which focus area, and functions in what role, where, which, and what, the 3 legs of any and every policy job, right? But we'll come back to this, but coming back to functions. So if you tell me that, hey, I work in a design and outreach sort of a role in a public policy firm, then your function is comms, right? Communications. Or if you tell me that you work in a branding role, your function is marketing. If you work in a program manager role, your function is operations. Or liaisoning role, function is partnerships. Risk advisory role, function is legal. Yada, 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 right? So many different roles and functions that you can work in a policy firm, or any firm for that matter, right? Now, why this becomes important is because if you think about it, and again, this is this is the sort of a structuring a framework that I have seen work for thousands, right? Just distills it down to its basics, right? That every single job lies at the intersection of these three. Every single job will be in a particular space, focus on a particular vertical, and involve a certain function, right? These are the three legs, three pillars of any job in that sense, right? In policy. And so the next time that you're reading a JD or looking to prepare to apply to a job, right, you can do a broadly dispassionate analysis for yourself that, boss, what is the gap? What should I work on to make myself a stronger candidate for this role, right? Do I not have enough experience in this space? Do I not have enough skills in this function? Or do I not have enough of a background in this particular vertical? I hope that makes sense, right? So there was that, right? What was the next thing? Yes, okay. You would ask that, okay, Ash, how do I, land an internship in this space or land a job, like from a broader practical perspective, right? A careers perspective. I would answer this via a framework, and I call it the TUP Principles. Basically, see, India is a very low trust society, right? Most developing countries are very low trust society, inherently low levels of social trust, right? And there's a reason that we buy anything that the Tatas sell us, right? The Tata Group in India, basically, right? From salt to steel to software, even school in the case of TIS, right? The Tata Institute of Social Sciences, because the Tatas have built trust over decades and centuries. In a low trust society, either you build trust over years and decades, or you borrow trust from institutions. So, for example, if I came to you for a job, if you were interviewing me, right, you would be like, yeah, I don't know if Yash has, say, policy advocacy skills or not, but Yash has worked in the parliament, at Twitter, in consulting. He must have those skills, right? In a sense, in the absence of any other way to reliably sort of a gauge. There are some ways, but never very foolproof in that sense that, to what extent, how proficient I am with a particular skill set that you're looking for. You tend to rely on the fact that, hey, he's worked with all these fairly well-respected brands and institutions before, so he must have those skills, right? And I can make a bet on that candidate, basically, right? And anyways, while hiring, recruiters have very little time to make these nuanced judgments, so they rely on sort of a placebos or shorthand methods, right? And so basically, it becomes a question of credibility, right? How credible you are as a candidate, right? It becomes a question of your credentials, right? And building credentials, from what I have seen, is like a 3-step process, right? First is you become better aware about what the credentials that matter in your field are, right? Step 1, become better aware about what the credentials that matter in your field are, right? For example, if you're a CA aspirant, then the credential might be where did you do articleship, right? Or if you're a lawyer, then it might be that which judge did you do your clerkships with, right? It might be something else if you're a policy professional, but the point being, just talk to people, show up at if there's a meetup or watch videos or interact with folks, just get a better sense about what the credentials that matter in your field are, right? So that at least we know we are working towards the right thing, right? The next step would be present your existing credentials better, right? I'll tell you, while I was in college, I did 7-8 internships, each in different city, different functions, different verticals, right? And all of these were internships that I would land by reaching out to institutions. Like, very few of them were that there was an opening and I applied and I got through. I can't remember any actually, right? And what the route that I would use, and I've seen this, I've seen thousands of people use this route in general as well, is that you reach out to institutions and individuals, the right set of institutions and individuals, and show how you can add value, right? So when I say that, present your existing credentials better, right? Like, for example, if you want to, work in the education sector in India, as an example, right? Maybe just make a slide deck of, possible, like the current state of education policy and sector in India, challenges that we see, possible or suggested policy reforms, right? And then in the end, then just talk about what your skills are and how you can add value, right? Maybe if you're someone who has great data skills, right, then instead of just listing it on your resume that, hey, I know Python or something, right, or Strata, just do a data analysis and visualization of maybe maternal mortality data in India from a particular ministry's website. A lot of these data sets are available for free, but I hope you get the point, right? That present your existing credentials better. Even your LinkedIn, your resume, they all matter a lot. Like, how you're communicating your skills and your credibility as a candidate, right? one of the best things I did for my career was, building yashagwal.co, right? My personal website basically, right? Works for me 24/7 even while I'm asleep, right? Allows people to discover some of my work and my presence and whatever, and just reach out, right? Very simply via a single click. Most of the good news is almost all of this for free. YouTube will teach you everything again for free, right? It's important that you invest some time in presenting your existing credentials better, right? So that's the second step, right? If you do step 1 and 2, it'll allow you to get to step 3, which is creating new credentials for yourself, right? It can be a mix, creating new credentials for yourself, and it can be a mix and match of any or all of the following. You can do full-time job, you can do a full-time degree, you can do part-time job, part-time degree, you can intern somewhere, you can volunteer somewhere, you can do some online certificate course for 2-3 months, you can enroll yourself into a fellowship, etc., etc., right? Usually, people start off with the third step, which is, hey, how can I get an internship, which is creating new credentials without working on step 1 and 2 first, right? So I would request that if you can kindly do pay some attention to that. Really just does help, especially in a very time constrained environment when recruiters have to make a lot of hiring choices and decisions, right? Make it easy for them to help you, just make their job easier in that sense, right? And also think about it this way: there's a full-time job, there's a part-time job, there is consulting, there's interning, there's volunteering. Okay, think about it like a pyramid, like a table, right? If you think about it, this was in decreasing order of commitment, right? Full-time job, most commitment; volunteering is the least commitment, right? But this was also in increasing ease of access. A volunteering gig is very easy to get in that sense, right? With a local non-profit NGO, you can just show up, volunteer on weekends, reach out to them. They'll be happy to have extra helping hands. Full-time job is the most difficult to get in that sense, right? So credentials at any part of this sort of a value chain, right, that I mentioned, are helpful. They matter, right? So I hope that answers the question that how do I practically land sort of a role or internship in this space. That you follow this 3-step process of creating credentials, enhancing your credibility in that sense, right? And just keep trying. Just show how you can add value, right? That really helps. The final bit was, how can one transition to this space, right? And in fact, I'll also take this up with the skills needed. See, very common questions in terms of what are the skills needed to work in policy. In fact, I think this can be a far longer video, just the skills bit. But it depends on which pillar of policy making are you working at, right? I don't have data visualization or analysis skills, but I have not needed them so far, because someone working, say, policy monitoring and evaluation there's a higher chance that they need these skills, right? As compared to someone like me who does not work in those 2 pillars of policy making, right? This is an example, right? In terms of how does one transition to the policy space, depends strictly on the career and phase of life that you're in, right? If you're a fresher or you're in college, even better, just follow the path I did, I would say, right? Just intern, work, show how you can add value, weekends, or I don't know, semester break, depending on the kind of resources you have, time and everything, right? Don't burn yourself out, of course, right? But whenever you can find an opportunity and you feel that I have some time on my hand, can I just learn something, pick up new skills, right? Do that. If you're someone who's like in the mid-20s, right, 25, 26, 27, something, then I would say it becomes slightly more difficult for you to give that sense of time, because your time is now worth a lot more in that sense, right? Then someone just in college to do all those internships and build that way up, then I would suggest maybe policy education is not that bad an idea. If you're someone slightly more senior, you can use your function to switch your vertical. For example, if you work in a communications role in an FMCG company, can you search for policy comms roles, right? Even at a slightly junior level than the one that you're currently in. In that case, what you're doing is you're utilizing your function, which is communications, to switch your vertical from non-policy to policy, right? Not as simple always, but usually I've seen a good pathway for people to try it, and it has worked in a lot of cases, right? But nonetheless, basically the point being, depends on the stage and phase of life and career that you're in, right? So yeah, that's what I wanted to cover in this video. Some of the most common questions regarding what policy is, how do you build careers here, how do you define public policy, what are the pillars of policy making, where is it that people are building careers, with what skills, what kind of organizations, how is it structured from a careers perspective, right? How do you land your first internship or job, right? In fact, now that I think about it, there's so many other videos that can be created in terms of going for a master's in policy, or career principles, or all sorts of things actually, right? So do let me know in comments if this was helpful, right? What should I cover next, right? These won't be the most well produced in terms of aesthetically pleasing videos, no, but I can promise you there'll be a lot of value, right? And just share whatever little that I've learned in all these years of trying to build a career, right? So, and please do share with anyone that you think might benefit from this. All for free, always, everything that we do at PPI. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much and take care. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.